purpose of medicine should not be just to make people live longer. The purpose of medicine should be allow us to live a full, rich, and connected life.
Mindful movement is really bringing about a huge invocation of awareness of our heart, of our spirit, of our soul, and really not just about motion and movement.
What's important that differentiates regular movement from movement that can be elevated to medicine is really purpose and intention.
For thousands of years, the heart has been the symbol of our emotions. But only recently has this surprising connection been really made clear. Today, we have a conversation about our relationship with our emotional health and physical health. And it's going to be fascinating because over the next half an hour, we will be talking to a world-renowned cardiologist about how mindfulness and movement can support heart health, and to a master posture expert who will be showing us quick practical movements that we can use to strengthen our bodies and our minds on the go. I'm Prakriti Poddar, and I'm the global head of mental health and well-being here at Round Glass. Dr. Jonathan Fisher, you're known as the heart of healthcare. And I love this because I would really love to start with your insights, 3 insights on how mindfulness can actually heal the heart.
It's so beautiful to be here with you. And this is a conversation that has been a lifetime in the making. Really, this is nothing that I was taught in medical school. Doctors and nurses don't talk about the emotional heart. We talk about medicines and we talk about surgeries. And yet we're here today speaking about the power of the emotional heart. The practice of mindfulness, as you know, involves taking a moment-to-moment look, attention at what's happening inside of us, what's happening in our bodies and our emotions, and also around us in an open, non-judgmental, even accepting and loving way. And what we find, if we look at the science and the research as to how mindfulness helps our emotional hearts and also our physical hearts, we see that the benefits come from changes in the brain, first of all. When we practice mindfulness, we become less reactive. The emotional centers of our brain, located around the amygdala, become quieter, and there are changes that are seen on MRI scans just within a few months of practice. We also see changes in our bodies when we practice mindfulness. So research has been done on meditators showing that the heart rate slows down, the blood pressure lowers, and that may even be a sustained effect. Now, these two together reduce our stress reactivity, our behaviors, where normally we might feel stressed out, we might push away a loved one. Instead, we welcome someone closer to us. Where we might reach for an unhealthy food or a salty snack or sugar or alcohol, instead we may choose to go for a walk or have something healthier to eat. So the third way that mindfulness helps protect our hearts really has to do with our behaviors, the choices that we make each and every day. Do we choose to nurture and nourish our physical beating hearts, or do we choose the activities which are more lying on the couch and watching Netflix for a few hours?
You know, what I love is I've been actually following you for a while, and I don't want to sound like a stalker, but really have gone through a lot of your podcasts and your conversations, even on LinkedIn. And I just find it fascinating that a Harvard-trained doctor for 23 years in the practice, has really brought together your practice of medicine and the practice of mindfulness and building this whole sort of connection, as you just spoke about, which is your cardiovascular connection to your physiology and your psychology. I think that is so incredible, and nobody's really doing it in the way that you're doing it. And I would really like to talk about it because you're also working a lot with practitioners and different kinds of providers in the health space and talking about burnout and stress. The links of these two things and really how it brings about a state of, even if it doesn't bring about, but it just kind of invokes a state of calm.
Yeah, it's been a dual pathway for me. So A decade ago, I was caught up in healthcare practice where I was working 11, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes 6, 7 days a week, working overnight call, physically exhausted. Nobody was talking about the benefits of sleep. I was on the verge of making medical errors. I was certainly acting like a jerk with my patients, even though I had the knowledge and people came to me for my expertise. I know they weren't getting the best of my heart. So on one hand, I was going through my own real struggles with hidden depression and anxiety because in our society, let alone in our medical system, we're not allowed to talk about these things. You may be judged, you may be an outcast. And on the other hand, I had patients who were coming to me just as I was secretly working through how do I work through my own stress. I had patients coming to me, and I saw that between 60 and 90% of every single person who came to me for help had underlying stress as a cause of their heart condition or their heart symptoms. And so I started to think about two separate pathways, and what I realized is there's no two separate pathways. Whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist, or a regular person, we are operating with the same system, the same physical heart, the same emotional heart. And so since that moment, I've been working to spread information for our healthcare system, to bring the emotional heart, psychological well-being as a core principle in terms of our physical health. It's really been left out. And I'm trying to carve out space in the traditional doctor's visit where I can meditate with my patients. I can teach them other practices other than just simply giving another medication.
That's so amazing. I mean, nobody really does that. So I'm really honored to meet you and to actually know that that's the work that you do. It's so amazing. I can't even say
Thank
it
you.
enough. I've said it like 4 times because I'm just like, most medical practitioners don't use integrative health,
Thank you.
in a way that you're doing. And everybody knows
Mm,
how important it is if you're a practitioner. But the medical field, I remember, because I do this work in India, but I do it more from the integrated health
mm,
system.
mm.
And I was giving a talk somewhere, and they said, I love the alternate medicine work that you do, and it's just picked up. And I'm like, actually, this is the real medicine, like years ago, that we had before actual, medicine, the way it's being taught, came about.
This is where the change in medicine that's happened over the last 30 years is amazing, because this phenomenon where you can literally suffer from a physically broken heart as a result of an emotional broken heart was not even a concept 30, 40 years ago. It wasn't until natural disasters in Japan actually resulted in lots of people, thousands of people coming to the hospital with chest pain. And they were being diagnosed with heart attack, but they weren't smoking, they weren't doing anything unhealthy. They just were under profound stress because of this natural disaster. And it was determined that this is something that's called broken heart syndrome, which is a real thing. And I've seen it. There
Gosh.
isn't a month that goes by where I'm not called into the hospital or into the clinic where someone has had emotional stress, like a patient of mine who lost her cat. And her cat died. Just within a few hours, she started having this gripping pain in her chest and she couldn't breathe. So she came to the emergency room, and sure enough, all the evidence showed that she was literally having a heart attack from the emotions that she was feeling. We found out later that she did not have blockages in the arteries of her heart. And so part of the treatment had to do with teaching her ways to work with her emotions. You wouldn't think that that would be part of the treatment. And so every single time someone sees me, whether they've had this condition or not, I try to share practices not just about the obvious, don't smoke, eat healthy. We also talk about nurturing and loving yourself, nurturing connections with others, and finding strategies so that when something horrific and terrible and stressful happens, if someone dies or someone you love is really injured or taken away, how can we work through that with compassion towards ourselves so that the emotions don't take the best of our hearts?
I'm imagining a situation where somebody comes to you and they're really talking about their physical ailment, and you start to invoke questions about what they're going through in their
Mm.
personal lives. I'm wondering how they take it.
Mm.
Like, do they understand where you're going with it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is something I was actually, Prakriti, afraid to do for a while, because in traditional model, we say, stick to the books, how far can you walk? Are you having chest pain? Okay, goodbye. And so I was afraid that people might look at me and say, this guy's a little bit weird. Why is he doing this? And even my colleagues who've now heard me talking like this, they say, okay, it's a little bit odd. But more and more what I'm finding is that I ask people, how did you come to find me? And they say, well, I saw your video and I know that you're now talking about more than just how fast is my heart beating, but you want to know about the emotions. And so what I found is the opposite. People are desperate to have their doctors and their nurses go deeper than the physical, talk about the spiritual, talk about the emotional. These are things that are really driving whether we're fulfilled and happy in our lives. Frankly, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I don't really care about whether somebody's heart is healthy or not in the sense that they're going to live to be 105 or 104. What I want to know is, are people experiencing kindness, joy, and love in their lives? The purpose of medicine should not be just to make people live longer. The purpose of medicine should be allow us to live a full, rich, and connected life.
What are some of the steps and strategies you would use to help them build their resilience? I think you call it something like emotional agility. What is that?
There's really two pieces here. One is emotional agility and the other is resilience. So emotional agility by itself has been beautifully described by Dr. Susan David, who's a PhD professor at Harvard University, who literally wrote the book, Prakriti, on emotional agility. And as she defines it, that is the skill, the ability that we can develop to bring all of our thoughts, all of our emotions as they arise to our life, but to navigate them to bring out the best in ourselves rather than the worst in ourselves and others. So emotional agility is recognizing that challenging emotions are going to come up. I'm going to get frustrated. Our connection could get cut off and I could panic. And realizing that I can take that in two ways. So the agility is the flexibility of noticing the emotion, deciding how to work with it or the thought, and then deciding what my deepest intentions are. So that's the one piece, and we can talk about that. The second piece has to do with this idea of resiliency, which we talk a lot about resiliency now. And frankly, I'm a little cautious about talking about resiliency. And you may have seen this in some of my writing, that resiliency nowadays in most organizations is becoming a shorthand for saying to the employees, this is your fault. You are not resilient enough. So we're going to teach you to be more resilient without changing our practices, which may be excessive work hours, understaffing, etc. So I'd like to be very careful and say resiliency is a powerful tool. We all have to develop it. It's so critical to teach it to our children. And at the same time, we mustn't use it as an excuse to avoid organizational and societal responsibility for the inequities and the unfairness that's there. So with that being said, we know from research in the 1970s, from Hawaii actually, there was a Dr. Emmy Werner, and she developed this concept of resiliency. And she said, well, there are so many children here whose parents are either alcoholics or abusive, and the children have suffered from adverse childhood events. And yet, when she started to look at them growing into adults, about 30% of them had these wonderful lives and were loving and kind and caring. And she really said, well, let me research the qualities of these children that allowed them to become resilient rather than reactive. And she found that they had three things in common. Number one, resilient children and resilient adults have a strong and abiding belief that no matter what happens, we can bring ourselves through it. So it's this sense of self-efficacy. Number two, and this is really important, we have an attitude about challenges where we don't give up. And we don't view challenges as there to get in our way. We view challenges as just maybe obstacles and learning points. So we take on what's called a growth mindset or a learning and growth mindset. And then the third aspect of resiliency, if we want to practice resiliency, we have to realize that it comes from a sense of purpose, a sense of connecting and being active in something that goes far beyond ourselves. If life is only about ourselves, we will never be resilient. We're always going to find ourselves alone. So that's the resiliency piece. And as far as emotional agility, I can give you kind of my really quick 3 steps to emotional agility if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah, so I call it the ABCs of emotional flexibility. And A stands for accept, B stands for balance, and C stands for cultivate. So if ever I'm in the hospital and I'm getting called in the midnight for an emergency like I was this past Sunday, and I'm starting to have this feeling like, I may make a mistake, something may go wrong, I'm not sure exactly what to do, I just stop and I say, hey, I'm already here, so I might as well accept it instead of fighting it and making things worse. And part of accepting it means giving it a name. So I say, okay, uncertainty, confusion. So it's very important to give emotions a name. It's called affect labeling in the world of psychology. And what we know from neuroscience is that when we feel an emotion and we give it a name, we're shifting the brain's activity from the emotional center into the language centers towards the front of the brain, closer to the prefrontal cortex, so that our executive functions, our decision-making centers come back online. So step one is accepting and naming. Step two is balancing. So sometimes that's a matter of really checking my beliefs and my thoughts. Like, okay, I'm uncertain and I think I'm going to cause harm. Is that realistic? Have I hurt anyone lately? These kinds of things. So there's this whole process relating to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is its own psychological field, where we can balance the emotion. And then third is really the most fun part, which is once we've felt the emotion, we've labeled it, we've learned to kind of check it, get some perspective from a distance, we can then finally look to our core values and say, do I want to be fearful in this next moment? Do I want to come to this, even this conversation right now? Do I want to be hesitant and anxious, or do I want to bring the best that I can, love and connection, and help with this program? And so that's where we have to be aware, and we can have fun asking, what are my deepest values? So for me, it's curiosity about life. It's a sense of appreciation of wisdom and knowledge. And then lastly, it's this desire to connect with other people. So we can shift our emotions in an emotionally agile and flexible way and redirect them and bring back now to the world what we want to see.
You were talking about purpose and the fact that that is such an important piece of your resilience as well. And I think that, I was listening to your work, and you said, yeah, you were brought up in a family which was, which understood that there was a purpose to give back to mankind, to humanity in a sense. And it was about, and how do you give that back? And you said that, well, we were taught to give it back with our brain. I think that you should rephrase that now, because I think you're really giving back through the heart and not just through your brain. And considering there are two different areas for this, I don't
Well, I'm
believe
still
that it's in
working
your executive functioning only, but it's probably like
on
in
it. No.
your emotional center as well, right?
This is my life. Like my life arc has changed really from thinking that I could fix problems and I could help others using my brain, and now I believe almost the exact opposite. I'm really course correcting, and this is going to be a continuous process.
Thank you. I want to add Courtney Bauer to the conversation. She teaches Pilates, yoga, and has created the Anya method, which draws from yoga, Pilates, and Thai body work with a strong inward focus. She calls it meditation through fitness. Courtney, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy and honored to be part of this conversation.
You've said that movement is medicine, and we're really talking about that today. And I'd love to hear more about your work and your book, which is Mastering the Art of Posture.
Yes, awesome. I do believe that movement is medicine, and I think that what's important that differentiates regular movement from movement that can be elevated to medicine is really purpose and intention. So when we consciously move, or when we mindfully move, we are connecting our mind and body and creating a conversation. And that conversation builds intimacy with ourselves, with our heart, and even with others. So that's where I feel like movement becomes something that's, yes, a good choice to move the body, to something that could perhaps heal our soul.
I know that you are seated in a comfortable posture. So, and you're on the ground. So I would love, I would love for you to demo to us some micro movements that we could do to build our own sort of strength right here as we are sitting.
Absolutely. So many of us are seated throughout the day, and what is happening more and more on an unconscious level is this slump. So when we slump, we may not even realize it, but when you see it on my body, it looks pretty, noticeable. But next time you're watching Netflix, or you're seated at your desk, or you're driving or commuting, notice the tendency to come into a slump. And while we wouldn't want to be in a slump in our career or in our relationships and our creativity, We also, it's not great to be in a slump in the body. The body is the instrument of our soul. So just like any instrument, when it's properly aligned, it functions better, it sounds better. When we get into that slump, we crowd our ability to digest and to breathe diaphragmatically, and we also crowd our heart. So when we come out of the slump, we are immediately getting back to our better alignment and balance. So the idea would be, one micro move that I love is called the L. So you make this this mudra of sorts, and you can turn it upside down with your index fingers on your hip bones and your thumbs reaching up to your rib cage. There's the first rib on the front. And this is called the side body. When this area decreases in space, it's not great for our health. It's optimal to have this space balanced and elongated. So by using your touch to feel the location of this part of the body, that serves as a reminder to lengthen it. So you can literally throughout your day just touch in with your side body just to program the idea of lengthening this area in order to balance out the space between the hips and the ribs. You can use the same mudra, it's multifaceted, at your collarbones, just to remind you that you may be hunched. So that's a great tool to remind you of the spacing that you want to honor and preserve so that the instrument, your posture, can function at its best. And a movement would be what I call the shimmy. So if your sit bones are the base of your posture when seated, just as your feet would be the base when you're standing, you shimmy them or just simply move them laterally, side to side, to know where they are. Similar to what Jonathan was talking about naming. When we name parts of the body, it brings the conversation there. It's like an invitation to get to know it better. So shimmying the sit bones is a small movement so that you know where they are. Then when you pause and get still, there's going to be a beautiful echo from that small movement because blood's going there, oxygenation, your intention and goodwill. And once you know where the sit bones are, balance your weight on them. That's so important because just like anything, if the weight is disproportionate, they're the foundation of the spine, and that's going to weigh in to the integrity and balance going upright. So mark your space, honor that space, create it, shimmy at your sit bones, and equalize your weight at your base is a good start. And they can be done anywhere.
That's amazing. This COVID period and having me behind the desk has ruined my physical health, really, honestly. I mean, I am just not used to sitting as a human being. I like to stand, I like to move, and I like to do a lot of exercise. And being on Zoom doesn't allow me to do that. Usually I would just walk with people and have meetings like that. And because I've done so much yoga in my life, I know that, just sitting, like what you're talking about, like most people don't know to move their glutes aside so they can sit on their sitting bones. I think that's such an important part. And like I go for some yoga classes here as well. And I'm like, why aren't they teaching the details? Like, why aren't they teaching the depth of, like, you see people sitting, they'll just say, sit on your sitting bones, but they don't describe it. And, I used to practice our younger as well. And in our younger, it was all about like, put that brick in a position so you can actually just be on your sitting bones. And it was a practice you did even just before saying, the prayer of invocation for yoga. But I think those are so important. And talking about these micro movements, which I find fascinating, is that the more attention you pay on the smaller movements and the micro movements, the better your yoga becomes, because it's about, like, even if you're like spreading your fingers, being totally mindful about how you're spreading them and how much you're spreading them and which one is actually spread more naturally and which one less, gives you so much in terms of feedback about what's happening and what are you losing focus on. And I think this, of course, then translates back into being mindful in your daily life. And I think that's really important. Like, just these micro movements of, like, I generally have a habit of sitting up straight. In fact, I find it very, I was raised by an army mom, which means that God forbid I slouched at all. God forbid that I actually, shifted a lot when we were like in a group. Like it just wasn't done. We just had like, I had a tiger mom who was a Leo as well. So double whammy right there. And she's still around. I'm sure she'll hear this and say, "What the heck?" But anyway, what I find that we have to really talk about, how this mindful movement is really bringing about a huge uh, invocation of awareness of our heart, of our spirit, of our soul, and really not just about motion and movement. So I find that really important. And we have somebody who's sent in a question. I'd like to take that and then really, dive a little bit deeper into that.
Hi, my name is Casey. I'm really excited to be here. I love to exercise and I'm an avid runner. And I try to exercise 2 to 3 times a week and definitely get in runs on the weekends. One thing that I've noticed is that when I'm running specifically, I'm usually focused on my heart rate and the distance and miles that I'm running, not necessarily about being present or mindful. And I know that there's a lot of benefits to doing so. So I'm wondering if you could give any tips or tricks on how to stay focused and grounded on that mindfulness piece, because I know my mind tends to wander and I definitely want to receive those benefits of staying mindful while running.
Thank you, Casey. Jonathan, advice for Casey?
I love Casey's question, Prakriti, because it's one that I struggled with as well. I used to do triathlons. And as I was learning mindfulness practice, I was thinking, oh, I'll just put that aside because I'm going to exercise now. And I found a couple of practices, and I'm just going to share one for Casey to try. Casey said that her mind wanders and it's really hard for her. Well, Casey, please know that you're not alone. That's the way the mind works. It's going to wander. And the advice that some people give to say, well, just don't think thoughts, just stop your thinking, I find to be really harmful in a way because it creates frustration. The mind needs something to focus on. So here's my tip. Next time you go out for a run, after you've checked in with your heart rate and your breathing and how your body's moving, focus your attention on your little toe on the left foot and just feel around with your mind. Notice if it's tingling, if the shoe feels comfortable or if it's tight, and then kind of work your way around that toe. And that should take about 10, 20, 30 seconds. And then just in your mind's eye, check in with your next toe over. And make sure you keep your eyes on the road and work your way all the way across the left foot and then up the ankle and then work through the toes on the right foot. And you can then work your way, checking in with each joint, each body part, working your way from the bottom of the body up to the top. Now, why do we start at the toes instead of starting with our ears? I find it useful because if we're stuck in our thoughts, we want to get as far away from our thoughts as we can. So you can't get any further from the brain than the toes. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. Courtney, I'd love a suggestion from you as well.
I love that idea of starting from a bottom-up perspective and moving through a scan through your whole system. Because yes, this headquarters can be rather full of thought. So when you draw your attention a little bit lower, somehow we kind of come out of this headquarters and into our body. One area of focus that I really love to pay attention to is the center of the body, because I associate it with being centered. So while you're running, you may want to bring your attention to your deep belly muscles and your pelvic floor by drawing this area of your body kind of inward, and not keeping it inward because you wouldn't want to compromise your breath capacity, but just feeling the strength of your center as you run and inviting this ability to add a little bit of a lift to the core musculature will help also create better alignment as you run.
Thank you. I have my own personal tip, especially with running, because I do not love it, but I do it because I have 2 dogs. I have to take them for a run. So I actually do it like twice a day. But what really helps me and has worked magic, especially when I was also training when I was younger, I breathe 3 times in and 3 times out. And I do this like consistently as I run. So it would be like, you know what? I never get tired. And this is probably why running is so boring. I could just keep running. like Forrest Gump. Like, I just don't stop because this breath work, no, seriously, this breath work prevents me from getting tired because my body is completely tuned. But usually I get tired in my mind because I get bored, or I get tired because, well, it's generally just boredom, honestly, or that I'm done. Okay, my watch says, okay, I'm done my time, I'm done, right?
Mm.
But the point is that the breath just keeps me going. And that breath keeps me so mindful because I can tell while I'm doing that if there is a shift in my knee or I didn't land correctly on one stride. Like, it makes me micro focused, on
Mm.
things. And I think that that is, so helpful. It was all in the breath. And it was
Mm.
all in being mindful. It was all in the breath. And if people who run actually used mindfulness while running, they'd be unstoppable, according to me. But we're going to be wrapping up because we really have run out of time. But before we wrap up, I'd really like to ask if there's a prayer or a mantra or some kind of breathwork practice that you've seen that brings overall alignment. What would that be? And if you could share that with our audience. So, Courtney, you can go first.
Okay, great. I feel like the small movements in your body can act like an affirmation and a mantra. So when you are shifting or consciously adjusting your posture, for example, lengthening this space and this space or shimmying, you simply label what you're doing. And it brings you into the present moment. It could be as simple as inhaling or lengthening or shimmying or balancing. And when you can connect the mind and body that way, it creates the power of a mantra in the sense that it really focuses your mind and softens any undue tension in your body.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Mm. I'm going to share a practice that I find helpful, and I found out why it's helpful. And it's so many of the people that I see in my work, whether it's colleagues or patients who are suffering, they're suffering either because they're afraid or they're ashamed or they're grieving or they're craving something that isn't happening that's helping them. So this mantra is called the loving kindness meditation. And very briefly, what you can do is to activate your awareness of your body, you bring one hand over your heart, your physical heart, since we're talking about the heart, and you can support it with the other hand. And in that practice, we're doing really two things. One, we're feeling the beats of our own heart. We're remembering that we're a living being that is much more than a brain walking around. And the other is that we're sending back to ourselves radiance and love into our own hearts, from our own hearts, creating a circuit and a cycle. And if we like, we can then give some wishes for ourselves to satisfy those things that we may not have gotten as children and we may still not have in our lives today. We know now that we can give ourselves the love and compassion that we may not have received. So I offer myself this wish, and you can offer it to yourself. May I feel safe and protected in this moment. And you can then silently say to yourself, may I also feel loved and connected with everyone that I'm with in this moment and the larger world. And then you wish, may I feel healthy and whole, whatever that means for me. May I feel healthy and whole. And lastly, you can wish yourself, may I go through life with a sense of calm, joy, and love. And you can relax your hands and notice any shifts or changes inside of your heart.
Well, thank you. That was great. And I want to thank you both for being here, Jonathan and Courtney. You can also sort of search for all the additional resources on Roundglass Living app and on the website, roundglass.com. And thank you so much for joining us. At Roundglass, we are holistic well-being. I am Prakriti Poddar, and I am holistic well-being.